Hi everyone, today we are pleased to welcome Neha Gupta, an experienced HR leader known for driving talent management and workforce transformation in fast changing business environment. Her work focuses on building people strategies that align skills, performance and business outcomes while keeping employees' experience at the center. As technology and work models evolve, Neha strongly advocates for a skill based approach to talent management moving beyond traditional job titles. Today, we'll speak with her about why this shift matters, how organizations can make it practical, and what it means for careers and future ready teams. Welcome, Neha, to the People's Pod. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here, Tripti. I'm glad to be here.
That's great. So, Neha, we would like to know first about your career and your perspective. So, to start with, could you tell us briefly about your own journey in HR and what inspired you to focus on talent and workforce transformation?
Absolutely, absolutely. Who doesn't love to talk about themselves? But let me give you a brief introduction. I've been working in HR for little more than 2 decades now, and let me just say, haven't regretted it for a second. It's been a very fulfilling career journey so far, and I have a lot of gratitude for it. I did have my education in HR. I'm a hotel management graduate who eventually fell in love with HR as one of the minor subjects. And just being good in academics and other things, my professors encouraged me to pursue a career in HR. So I started with learning and development and eventually moved into leading HR for growing organizations about 15 years back, I want to say. And my journey in HR has evolved with just the evolving business landscape. So the way the world kind of changed, how it became more digitized, different generations came into play. I realized HR role is also no longer administrative. I mean, luckily, being in learning and development skills and transformation was always on the agenda. But I understood that as I grew as an HR leader, there's an opportunity to play a much bigger role in service of the business as well as the people as well as the community in leading the skills and transformation agenda in a way that makes sense. So that's been my journey. Currently, I work with an organization called Material as their head of HR for Asia Pacific, and I'm leading the journey again of culture, skills, and digital transformation over here. And in my personal life, I'm a coach. I'm also on a life journey to coach, mentor, and ally with 50 women to lead them into leadership positions or decision making positions in the board. So that's a life agenda to pay it forward. But that's a little bit about my journey.
So Neha, that's an exciting work, I see, because handling corporate and as well as being a coach, that looks like two different sides of it. One you're dealing with women's and one you're dealing with the corporate. Corporate is very different. I've been there, done that, and actually have come here now. So what do you think about that?
I mean, nothing is easy in life, but and it definitely requires a lot of juggling. And Tripti, you've been in corporate, so you know the rigmarole that it is. But I think it's about just managing your time in a way that kind of makes sense and knowing that you'll not win every day. So, for instance, flexibility is a big part of my journey. Being able to say no to things that don't really that are not really important in a way that they will create meaning for someone or for myself. I think that's really important, and being able to trust and delegate, I think that really also helps, whether it is at work, whether it is at home. I think that really helps. And yeah, not trying to do it all in one day. I guess.
Take a pause.
Take a pause for sure.
That's nice. So Neha, I just heard you saying about talking about skills and job titles. So let's try to understand the shift here. What does it mean to rethink talent management in the age of skills rather than job titles? What do you think about that?
Um, I'm going to be a little provocative here, and I'm going to say that in general, job titles lie. Now let me tell you why I'm saying that. See, job titles make sense in the way that they give structure and hierarchy to an organization. But what actually has happened over a period of time is that people's identities, their pay, they've started getting associated with job titles in a big way, and organizations have found it as a safer way to handle, I think, careers, handle business, and even within HR, I think we just over index on them. So what happens is that when they are over indexed on, or when people hide behind job titles, or if HR or business hides behind the job structure to avoid answering difficult questions of the employees, then they hide capability. They slow down the business. They reinforce hierarchy over actual contribution that people are making, and that's the reason a shift is now happening towards more of a skill-based culture, because in today's business context, when businesses and especially so in India are dealing with the multi-layered challenges, one of just of digital transformation, second of competing at a global level, and third with the changing workforce or generation, from millennials to Gen Z, and in another 4 years we'll see Gen Alpha enter the workforce as well. I think with all of that, a skill-based organization, creating that becomes really important, because what matters not is what really is the job title of a person and how do we move there next. And we don't even want people to focus on it. I think the businesses and people's focus needs to be, what is a person doing right now and what can they do next for the organization, not just because the organization will also not necessarily exist in a similar state. The cycles are changing very fast. So will a person be relevant, meaningful, and growing the organization 6 months from now, 2 years from now? That's something that a job title based rigid hierarchy itself cannot solve. That's what a skill based organization can really solve, and that's the reason they're becoming more important than what's written on visiting card, I guess.
So, what do you think that you're able to break that stigma? Because a lot of people still chase titles, still think about that. Okay, we are getting money or not. It's okay. We should get a promotion.
Yeah.
We should get a title in the company, because that's how we will be respected. So,
Correct.
yeah. So, do you think that change is coming?
I think it is coming in, but I'm not going away from the very harsh reality that you cannot dismantle job structures overnight. I just said something a few minutes before, that job titles in our culture, globally also, but more so in our culture, are linked to pay, they're linked to hierarchy, they're linked to social status, they're linked to how a person feels about themselves. They give a lot of validation. So it's impractical to dismantle them overnight, and we shouldn't do that as well. I think job structure should remain. I think what really needs to happen is that there needs to be a bit of a skill overlay on the top of job structure. How do you do that? How do you make sure that skills become so relevant that job titles don't really matter so much that they give people sleepless nights or anxiety about what really is my current job title and what's the future job title? And similarly, organizations don't over-index on it. That happens when we start making decisions based on skills, and these are important decisions. So decisions related to pay, decisions related to career movements, decisions related to performance ratings. I think those kind of decisions, opportunities themselves, right? When I talk about staffing, so when that shift happens, then job descriptions still don't disappear overnight, but at least they stop being the most important thing that people or businesses obsess about.
So Neha, I feel that you've answered my next question, but still I want to ask, like, if you want to add any points. In your experience, what has been the biggest limitation of job titles, title-based talent system in today's organization?
I think, as you rightly said, there is the limitation that comes with it, that job titles will have a job description attached to them. Typically, industry these days, Trupti, has started moving at a faster pace than HR systems. I mean, that reality has been long term coming, but what happens is our performance in HR systems, that job descriptors and titles are also a part of move. Let's say I'm just giving an example or an analogy that they'll be made to be relevant for, let's say, a 2-year or a 3-year cycle, while the business will change every 6 months. So they always try and catch up. That's one of the biggest limitations, that they are we've traditionally been taught to create job structures and job titles and in a way that fit a more stable world than what we are living in today. So they need to be more agile, they need to be more skill based. They need to also, one more limitation that they have is they're externally focused. So it's more about, I have a job title and a structure, and the first thing that typically any business or HR will do is to say, how do I use this to look for talent outside, versus saying, a lot of organizations don't yet realize that the biggest competition from a talent perspective is not outside. The biggest competition is within themselves, which is how are they developing talent internally, how are they upskilling their own workforce and people to really move forward. So that's where what I think are the biggest limitations of job titles and descriptors thereby.
And how are the business demands and technology changes driving the shift towards skills?
That's an interesting one. The buzzword, which is artificial intelligence, in the real ways that it is changing today's business landscape. I think automation, of course, has a bigger role to play. In artificial intelligence, there's a lot more conversation right now about how AI might change things as compared to real action on the ground. So this is not a critical comment. This is just the reality on the ground. But whether it is artificial intelligence, whether it is automation on the ground, whether it is, I think, platform models, things moving to cloud, data regulations, social media, how that really is adding on to the overall complexity of things. And of course, as I said, a changing generation. There was an over-indexing of millennials who lived in an analog generation and transitioned to a digital generation. And now the workforce has changed to people who were born with technology, who knew their devices, and that's that's definitely causing a major shift. So from a technology, as you said, that how's that driving a shift? So if anything, I think that's the biggest change maker and disruptor in today's day and age.
Okay. And how AI is impacting, because this is the first interview out of till third question, I've not heard about AI, because since last few interviews we have been talking about AI a lot. So what do you think that how AI is playing a role here?
There's a whole spectrum on which artificial intelligence is there. As I said, that I look at conversations on artificial intelligence with a lot of amusement and curiosity, and even as a learner. Everybody is trying to decode what AI is and trying to implement solutions. And as I said, in my view, with any kind of new thing or any kind of situation, you've got to go back to what is called as first principles. What is internally a business problem that exists, for instance, that AI can do better? If we don't move to AI, we'll lag behind. I think those kind of questions need to be asked by business leaders and HR leaders. And similarly, with the AI solutions that are available in the market, what really is relevant? Do we have appetite to learn? How much appetite do we have to learn, and what really do we need to pick up? So depending on the kind of people that are there, the kind of nature of the business, and how AI fits in the business strategy, I think that's how it needs to be looked at. So a lot of conversation is happening around AI. I think that needs to pause, and people really need to go back to drawing board and start looking at it from a problem solving approach, or a business building or capability building approach. That's I think the basics for me. And how, for example, and I can share a few examples in the way we are using artificial intelligence, for instance, right? So be it helping people who are not who are great technically but not great with communication skills. Copilot is integrated, for instance, to help them refine their emails, their client proposals, their conversations, for instance. In a multicultural or a multilingual kind of an organization that we have, it helps people connect with colleagues and break the language barriers, for instance, right? Creating client solutions that relied more on a person-based model versus a product-based model where solutions can be automated. That's where artificial intelligence is being used. Then let me talk about community and culture, where I think from an HR perspective, I think we've been able to bring about a change, and I'm sure a lot of HR professionals are doing that, as to how do you bring talented people in the workforce who were previously restricted by, let's say, their lack of English speaking skills or communication skills, which is over-indexed on in corporate India, for instance. So how do you help them translate their work using artificial intelligence? How do you teach prompt engineering, for example, to the grassroots level employee, people who are managing our security, administration, housekeeping? How do you help them understand prompt engineering to be able to work in a world which is largely ruled by data, and be able to connect, for example, with the rest of the stakeholders on a level playing field, and always feel like they're lagging behind. So that's where I think artificial intelligence really has practical uses. But if again I can share a bit of a bold take, is to say that the chatter needs to calm down, and we need to focus on AI more from a perspective of what problems can it solve for us in reality.
That's true. So it's a good change. I mean, overall, I feel that it's a good change if it is implemented well and understood, the meaning of it.
I think you've just summed it up so beautifully. Absolutely. I mean, we can make it a good change if implemented well, for sure. Thank you.
So Neha, let's talk about practical implementation of skill-based approaches. What are some practical ways organization can identify and map the skills they need now and in the future?
I'm so glad you asked me this question. It made me think, Tripti. Let me mention one thing that I observe a lot. I think where HR professionals go wrong or businesses go wrong is when we make a massive skills repository. One of the problems of today's world is just the abundance of content and things that are available. So our problem of today's day and age is not finding the right solution. It's about picking the right solution from a bunch of things that are available. So 300 fancy skills repository doesn't work anymore. Then it becomes a bit of a book or a bit of a skills repository that's out there. The moment we fall in love with fancy words and amazing solutions, and then it stays on an internet page that no one really looks at for the right reasons ever. So the best way to use a skills framework in an organization, again, is to look at it from the pivot of the business problems that we are trying to solve. So what really does a growth phase or next level of evolution look like for that particular business? What really are the problems that we are trying to solve today? What really are the failing points, be it in terms of getting business, growing it, growing people, for instance. And those are the problems when you kind of diagnose them and really listen into the solution or see what data is telling you. That's where I think that can give you the answers, that what really are the skills for today and skills for future. And then how do you just go crazy about oversimplifying it to a degree where it's practical, where it's usable. I think that's the best way to create skill repositories and frameworks that work for a business solution. It's definitely needs to be a tailored approach, not one size fits all, I guess.
Okay, so as we are talking about the repository in the organization, there's a lot of repository for job descriptions. So most companies are structured around job descriptions. How can they begin to transition meaningfully to skills framework?
That's a good question. We spoke about this a little while back also, but let me actually link it to this question. I had said something, and I'll pick up the thread from there. I had said that rather than dismantling job descriptions overnight, we've got to make skills so relevant in our decisions that job descriptions or job titles do not remain the most important thing in the room. So how do you do that? One, of course, as I said, by the way of managing key decisions in a way where skills matter. So first thing is you've got your right skills identified. I think secondly, whenever there are decisions that are being taken as related to putting people in critical roles, don't just look at the job title just because somebody is a chief of whatever or a director or manager or a president of something does not necessarily equate to they are the right person for the job. So organizations will have to take a step back and go a little radical in understanding that have they mapped their people correctly in terms of are there systems available where people's skills, the levels of skills, all of those things are listed, for instance, and can right people be picked up for the job. So the talent management, performance management, and succession planning systems need to be practical, robust, and simple enough to be able to identify right people for the job. Once we know that who are the right and the capable people, like if that is something that's figured out, then decisions, as I said, around pay, around performance, about critical opportunities, those can be indexed more on skills rather than on job titles per se. So I think those are the ways by taking the right decisions is how skills framework or a skill based system can really overtake a rigid job title based system, is the way I look at it.
And how should performance conversations or appraisal change in a skill focused model?
I think one, making performance conversations continuous rather than only having performance conversation twice or once in a year. So it should not be, traditionally what we've done is we've made performance conversations as a bit of like a dance. I always smile about it that there are all these rituals associated with when there's a performance season that comes in, and it's horrible. It sounds like flu season is here, right? I mean, suddenly there's a discussion of, we have ratings, we have a bit of a bell. I mean, all those things are necessary. I'm not ridiculing performance systems, whatever. But what I'm saying is that when we shy away from doing critical, motivating, and difficult conversations throughout the year to help people manage and grow their performance and grow them to their full potential throughout the year, then performance cycles becomes a bit of a ritual, and then it gets over indexed on, we set a target, did you achieve it? That's great, here's your rating, right? And that's great, like you're still being objective, but now the next level of evolution is already here. We're not talking to people about the questions we should be asking, and we've got to do that to say, hey, how did you grow yourself this year? Are you ready for the next phase of evolution of the organization in the next 2 to 3 years? How did you contribute to the culture, to the community, to the values of the organization that are really important? How did you help others be successful? So again, moving from this competitive scarcity mindset that I win versus you lose, how do you create abundance mindset in the organization that by making everybody successful, making the business successful is how you become successful? So I think those kind of questions, which is about, did you make people around you successful or did you hoard resources for yourself, especially to leaders? Did you learn something new in the process, or are you the same person you were last year? Did you create something for the organization, be it an IP, be it a system, be it a process that helps us become better as an organization for our people, our clients, our community, our culture, our stakeholders, shareholders? I think those are the questions when they get interspersed in a continuous performance management process is how we make it more relevant and more related to skills. Tripti.
Very true. But Neha, one of your questions stayed with me, like, when you were telling me about 1, 2, 3 questions. The second question, when we talk about culture, when we talk about organization, do you think people really think about it overall the year? Do people really align with it? We talk about culture in the organization, we talk about initiatives, we talk about our values. But really, people think about it. They think that, okay, we have to think in this direction as well as along with our work. Because a lot of time people are just focused on their work. They feel that our performance is measured only through the work we are delivering, but beyond that nothing matters. So what do you think?
Um, I'm so glad you asked that question, Tripti, and that's a very relevant question that, people will. Is there an intrinsic need that human beings have? Let's back up a little bit to find meaning in their life, in their work. Absolutely. I think what we forget, for instance, is that whether as human beings or whether as corporates or business leaders, that a person has 24 hours in a day. I give this analogy since my training days, right? A working professional, while of course, people work for bread and butter in general, and they want to, sustain and survive and have a good life, but they do spend majority of their adult or working life with their colleagues, sometimes even more so with the very family or very loved ones that they're working for, right? So you wake up in the morning, you kind of get ready for work, you travel. Even if you don't travel, you're working remotely, you log in, and which means even a longer work day, and then you kind of engaged in an organization, you come back. So, for people not to have, even have a subconscious need to have a meaning or a purpose that goes deeper than the work, like that's, I would say that's a bit ridiculous to think that doesn't exist. Why that doesn't come through in the organizations is because if that's not prioritized, I would go to the fact that even to the degree to say, even if people feel like it gets penalized, I have a manager, I have a leader who never talks about culture. It's always an HR agenda, right? If I contribute too much to something within the organization that's helping us at large, but it doesn't help my manager or my team, then I'm scared that one, of course, it will not count towards my contribution, and B, I can even get penalized as a result of over investing in a particular area. So our organization systems built to support people's contribution to culture, which, by the way, we all have, many of us may have heard this famous statement that culture eats strategy for breakfast, that culture is that important and people build the culture. So what can we do as organizations to make sure that culture is relevant? Because people want to have meaning, they want to have richer engagement with an organization. And my current organization, for example, is 80% remote when I started, and now we're about 60% remote, but majority of my people that I work with, colleagues, work remotely, and I understand that building culture is a key part of the role. One thing that we did, for instance, I can share with you, is a couple of years back when we were relooking at our performance systems, we said that our goals will fall into 3 categories. So there's a contribution goal, which is around that how did you contribute to building your competency area. Let's say if you're an engineer who's working in Drupal, then yes, you worked for the clients, but what was your contribution to building let's say Drupal as a capability area? Did you contribute through articles? Are you a thought leader? Did you create an internal learning community? There's of course clients itself, which is your work. So internal or external clients, did your targets meet? And the third element is culture. How do you contribute to the culture of the organization? And that pivots on the 5 different values that we have within the organization. So is it towards learning? Is it towards diversity? Is it towards creating an impact? And that drove such a pivotal shift because people could see that I can contribute to culture and that will count towards my goals or my OKIs, or it will be a part of my performance discussion, which will lead to tangible results within the organization. And the other thing is our leaders talking about culture. When the top leaders, when they show up in employee meetings or town halls or what have you, are they really, talking about culture initiatives or calling out people who've done something great for the community, let's say in critical times? I can think of, for example, how many organizations did it that they called out employees who volunteered for others during COVID times. Those are the ones that you should look for and say what their culture is like. Are there organizations where somebody really looked at their own project or their own piece of work, but also looked at something else and, really helped a colleague while they could have done even better than they are doing right now, and a leader called them out and said, hey, this person really contributed. So what you reward is what will get what will become richer, or will you nurture it. So long-winded answer, but very passionate about it. So I think people care. The short answer is that I think people care, but I think they need to be not penalized for caring. Let me just say that.
That's really right, and I really like the idea because and the example because we see that reluctancy a little bit into developers and the roles where like they have to focus on the coding and all these things. They're not much involved in the conversations. So actually, the good example you have given. So to explain it. Yeah. So, Neha, I see, I saw earlier in your profile that you've worked a lot on career growth and people, experience and excellence. So, for employers, what is the key benefit of a skill-based approach compared to traditional job titles?
Cool. I think you're talking about employers or employees?
Employees. For
People.
employees.
Employees, right?
People. Yes.
People. A skill-based approach helps people become relevant for I think the business ecosystem at large. When they choose to become a part of the skill-based ecosystem or leverage the upskilling opportunities, whether offered by the organization or otherwise personally invest, I think it brings, in short, dignity and optionality. Dignity because they're no longer dependent on a manager or a team or a specific role within an organization to look at that next promotion or pay package. That's not what really the definition of the growth is, because now the horizons open up. They're multi-skilled. They can opt for so many different projects and different kind of work opportunities within the organization and outside. And that's what I mean by optionality. That when you kind of not when your skills are unilateral, when they are not diversified, then you kind of depend on allies, depend on mentors, depend on others to kind of know what your worth is and why you should grow. Versus when you're multi-skilled and those skills are being showcased and shown in different areas, then you create a bit of a career proposition for yourself. So that's why I think that whether it is within an organization or outside, it just increases the value proposition of people or employees.
So the similar question for organization: how can organization make sure employees are motivated when moving across roles based on skills rather than seniority or titles? I think you covered it a little bit when you were telling us about the titles, but how organizations can make sure?
I think the organizations will have to eventually remove that linkage between opportunities and job titles, as I said. They better make sure that their talent management, performance management systems are so strong that they know who their people are and what their skills are at real time. Let me give an example. Like if organizations have an HR system, which could be as simple, by the way, as like a live Excel sheet. Does that give people an opportunity to write down what their current skills are? Can they mention that what really is their skill stack? What are the new things they've learned, certifications, etc. Now you take it forward to a certain degree. You can kind of attach assessments to it where people kind of mention it that that they have a certain skill, and let's say an assessment pops up and they do it, and there are internal certifications, etc. built in. But they definitely can put their skills up. So there has to be a system or a mechanism through which organizations are able to access and see what really is the latest talent portfolio like. And that's not just, and people mentioning skills they've acquired is one part of it. It could be about through project debriefs, for instance? Is it very clear that how a person really contributed, what really were the critical contributions, both with technical skills, soft skills, and leadership skills at play, right? Who, for example, has the highest learning agility? That also comes in play. Hey, this person wasn't performing that well 1 year back, but look, their learning agility is so strong that they've come up. That, for instance, matters more than anything else. You can no longer brand people as being mid or really great anymore, because if they have great learning agility, they will pick up speed and move forward. So organizations will have to decouple this, that every time an opportunity opens up, they're traditionally again going out in the market and looking, or really looking at, oh, this person's job title matches, so let's see if they fit, versus being able to look at an overall talent pool and say what really are my greatest fits. And then you kind of go a little more detailed into it to link skills with better work, better pay, better visibility. And we've got to bring organizations to a place where these answers are, or like some very traditional answers have become a little, employees are getting tired of it. Oh, you can't get promoted because the promotion cycle isn't there. You can't really be a director in this role because you know what, you're just a senior associate right now and it's like 2 levels up. You've got to make things happen for people and opportunities in a way that makes sense. Of course, am I saying rules should flow out of the windows? No, but the bureaucracy that comes, the rigidity that comes associated with the role that makes talented people frustrated, I think that needs to go away, and organizations need to be authentic, and HR needs to play that role as well in having honest conversations with leaders and people over there.
Yeah, I remember these questions are coming from a long way, that why promotions are not happening, why we are waiting for the cycle, and when we are performing, you're saying that we are up for it, why you're not giving it to us.
So, exactly. About time, right, that these questions were handled more authentically so that we can answer them more authentically. It's almost become meme material at this point.
Probably that is the reason Gen Zs are asking beforehand that, okay, give us the position first.
That's true. I think they've seen again, I would say that the dance so far for the longest time with their elder siblings or parents or friends or what have you, and the Gen Zs, they and that itself is an interesting conversation, that they look for clarity. Their relationship with employers is very different. That's defined by their own social conditioning, how they've grown up, the kind of world that they've grown up in, and a clarity and transparency in transactions, being able to see the results. I think that's extremely important for them, and organizations need to respond to that.
That's true. And what about Neha? I see that you have been working as a mentor also. So what role does learning and development play in the helping people build skills that matters?
Organizations that have had learning and development for the longest time have seen people grow and contribute to the organization in multifaceted ways. I have to say that over a period of years, Tripti, I've seen organizations that question the need of learning and development, that really invest in it, and this is purely experience speaking. The organizations who've invested in learning and development of their people have really reaped the rewards by being able to retain people, grow them, and have them, because when people stay with an organization, and if for the right reasons, they generally carry so much legacy knowledge, context with them, that they're able to play a part in making critical decisions or support new areas, and almost become sponsors for the organizations invested in a different way. Is the need for learning and development shape and size and how it exists changing? Absolutely. Learning and development was very program and output specific in the past. So you would go to a classroom training, you would really do a certification, you would do e-learning. Like there were these boxes. We would respond to business needs. We would respond again to an assumption that organization is going to remain the same in 3 years or 5 years time. That's how long journeys were really built in. Today, learning needs to be available on the fingertips. So, everybody carries a device with them. So are they able to access learning over there? It needs to be live. wherever human interaction is needed as a mentor, as a coach, whether it is for empathy, whether it is for creating a real world change, I think that needs to be looked at. Learning needs to be tailored and linked to real world internal mobility, career outcomes, so that it's not seen as a distraction, it's seen as an investment. So you've got to make sure that businesses know what they're investing in, people know the time they're investing in, right? So with attention spans becoming shorter and patience becoming a little lesser as a society in general, needs to kind of make sure that its business case is strong and its offerings are relevant to the audience of today and the business problems of today. Yeah.
So I think the change has already come. Like, when we see that 10 years back, people were, I think people in the organization also, you need to go and convince them to take the trainings. And now people are up for it, on their own. They're not resisting anymore.
Yeah. You're right. You're absolutely right that you no longer have to convince people to go ahead and get trained. And if anything, if you see even, people watching, sometimes India is a content-hungry nation. Globally learning is happening, and especially in Asia, but India is a content-hungry nation. And, with the digital revolution that we've had, thanks to it, learning is available to everybody. It's democratized. People can see a 60-second reel about how to create something while eating or doing whatever, being in their bed. So organizational learning is not something that remains separate from it. It's pretty much a part of the journey. So do not assume that people will depend on an organization. People should not also assume that an organization only will equip things for them. It kind of exists as a bit of a continuity, and that's why, as I said, learning needs to be tailored, it needs to be in time, and it needs to be very aware of what's happening around and in tune with it. It can't exist in an isolation or a box any longer.
And what about the leaders, Neha? How much role leaders play? What mindset do leaders need to adopt to support skills-driven talent management?
That's an interesting one. First thing leaders of today need to do is to, and I'll use that word again, I think just use the abundance mindset. I've seen it like few years back, leaders who would be successful or who would believe that they would be successful is by creating kingdoms. I have a best team, I have a set of talent which is the best in the organization that can do an amazing job, and I lead them by kind of controlling them. And it came from a good place, by the way, generally good intentions that I protect them from this big bad world outside, even within the organization's ecosystem. So I have a great bunch of people who work for me, who I don't lend to anyone, and I grow them because I know the best. That no longer works. I think leaders today need to realize that they are enablers and navigators. They do not necessarily know the best. So you don't lead the people, you lead with them, right? So influencing is important. I think humility to understand that you may not be a subject matter expert of everything may be important. So leadership is a collective activity. And I think an abundance mindset, as I said, is an important. When you compete even within the organization ecosystem and you kind of keep your resources to yourself, talent to yourself, you don't give your people away, then either you have put a dent in some part of the business where one of your team members could have helped, or you've limited their own career. So they will get frustrated one day and leave. So I think leaders need to lead with empathy for sure, understanding of how the external and internal world, whether it is geopolitics, whether it is how generations are changing, whether it is the competition in the business landscape, all of those things. But also, as I said, a bit of an abundance mindset. They need to leave insecurity at the door. So a lot of self-work, self-awareness is needed for somebody to be a successful leader today.
And one tip if you would like to give to the managers to identify high potential or future talent if they are looking beyond job titles?
Look at who understands the organization's North Star the best and is aligned to it. Look at the value system and intentionality with which people work. Are they the person that you're assessing? Are they only focused on I do a great job in my definition, and I don't care about the world about me, or do they really care? So what's the value system? And most importantly, uh, who's learning and unlearning the fastest? Who's adopting the fastest, right? So learning agility becomes extremely important in an ever-changing world. Who's performing well in ambiguity? The world around us is ambiguous right now. So those are the questions that need to be asked. Who learns and unlearns the fastest? Who's adopts the fastest? Who performs well in ambiguity? And as I said, all of that can be anchored into a person's value system, resilience. Because one thing that, by the way, has remained true across generations, a lot of things have changed, is that you can teach people skills, you can teach people competence, you can not teach them values and attitude. That's very intrinsic. So that DNA, if that is in the right place, is the kind of things that people should be looking at.
Yeah, so I can relate to it. I mean, I've worked for 16 years now, and one motto I've always followed in life is that you can change everything, but you cannot change a person's attitude. That if they are willing, then only you can change it. Otherwise, you cannot change it.
100%. I love that. You're so right. You're so right. I think that's so intrinsic.
Yeah. So Neha, any examples where you've seen resistance from leadership when proposing skill-based practices, and how can HR address that? I know, I'm sure, you must have seen it.
No, of course, I'm smiling because it's resistance to change is a very human thing, Tripti. I mean, you enough experience, I have enough experience. It's a daily thing, resistance is a part of life. My 11-year-old son, who's supposed to be the new penny, he will resist change. He's very set in his ways. So I'll ask him to do something differently. So leaders at that, I have a lot of empathy and feeling for leaders. And many a times, I mean, resistance to change is more commonplace. I've met leaders who respond brilliantly to change, but they are the ones who understand that resistance to change is emotional generally. More often than not, it's not logical. So how do you deal with, how do I deal with resistance to change? I think before wanting someone to change, again, empathy plays a great role. I was very lucky in the beginning of my career to have an exposure to customer service. So when I was in hotel management, I interned with the Uberoids, and I think the hotel chain, and I think no one understands customer experience better than them, and as a result of which they teach you empathy and listening and understanding people better than others. I owe a lot of my value system or the way I work to them. Coming back to this question, how I apply this in life today is that before expecting people to change, I think it's important to first of all understand them as human beings, really listen to them, that where is the resistance of change coming from. Really, first of all, listen to it and understand without judgment that is that a legit resistance to change? What are their fears? What are their worries? What do they think will not happen? And working with them to help freeze out those issues or challenges, I think that really helps. And building those relationships where people trust you for your authenticity and genuine interest in solving issues in organization context or for them, and which is of course rooted in integrity. I think that becomes really important and solves for resistance from leadership, I guess.
Okay, that's a good point actually, because connecting with people is very important.
Correct.
Yeah. So, we all have been talking about and using that term over the LinkedIn or social media, future of work. With
Yeah.
evolving technologies, like AI and automation, how should
Mhm.
organizations anticipate the skills, they will need 5 years from now?
Hmm. Uh, I think, give me a second, Tripti. Let me think about the answer to this question. Oh my God, I have so many comments in my head. I just need to process this.
You want me to ask you the question again?
Yes. Just give me a minute.
No problem.
Future of work. Ready for this? You can ask.
Yes. So, with evolving technologies like AI and automation, how should organizations anticipate the skills they will need 5 years from now?
Um, Very important, Tripti, over here is to stop worrying about predicting the future of work. Exactly, I'm going to say something a little more unconventional. Is to first of all stop obsessing over figuring it out exactly. Like, don't chase perfection. Don't the assignment over here for HR leaders or business leaders is not to figure out what the world will look like exactly 5 years or 3 years from now. No one can do that. I think what needs to be done is double down on enduring capabilities. So critical thinking, you know, do people have critical thinking that helps them with pattern recognition, that helps them with being able to be strategic, being able to be insightful, digital fluency, for instance, with changing platforms, changing apps, narratives. Geopolitics again is linked to that which country, which part of the world is coming forward with new digital solutions, working with that, collaboration with AI, business judgment, being able to be networked properly, not just internally focused, but an awareness of the world outside. Dialogue, I think, has become very important. Organizations are no longer in a space where they think if we don't talk to our competitors, you've got to talk to everybody. You see competing countries talking to each other, right? Like countries which are in political infights really still staying in dialogue. So companies have to take a leaf from that playbook. Leaders have to take a leaf from that playbook. That do they have a network? Do they have a community? And that's what the true power is. And then of course, leveraging what really data and analytics throw at you. I mean, that's become a given. I haven't spoken about it a lot, but that pretty much remains the underlying theme of everything. That do you have relevant systems that are able to convert your data into meaningful insights and can have a look at it. So I think those are the things that become more important than having an accurate prediction of what really the world looks like in the future. All you can do is just pivot yourself into some of those critical skills and then build the future along and actually take part in future building.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Neha, as we're going towards the end of our conversation, I would like to ask one piece of advice. What would you like to give to HR leaders who are just beginning to transition to a skill-centric talent approach? What do you think?
That's a good point. I think leaders, HR leaders who are moving towards a transition based approach, I would say don't wait for permission or perfection. This is something I've learned from some brilliant business leaders in my current organization that I'm a part of, that I've worked with. Some of them have left, some of them are still around, but don't wait for permission or perfection. Just start, right? It's not an HR project. You're talking about a business survival strategy. So start somewhere, work with business, stay in the driving seat with them, partner with them, and that's how you figure out. So start where the business feels the pain, and then eventually you can build momentum and let the organization sort of catch up. HR credibility, it will be built on, I think it will be built on relevance and not really built on in rhetoric, if I may say so. I mean, if HR leaders will wait for leaders to be fully comfortable with skill-based models, it will be 5 years late. It's not going to happen immediately. So start, be patient, and as I said, don't wait for perfection or permission. So that's the way to go about it.
So it's not going to happen in a day, right?
It's not going to happen in a day for sure. And as I said, it's not a start state or an end state. It's an evolving journey. So don't look for beautiful completion timelines or targets. Yeah, just look for wins as milestones and keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, nice. So Neha, we have come to an end. It is a wonderful conversation with you. I feel that I've just started because I could able to relate with you a lot. I mean, you reminded me of my corporate time. You reminded me of the challenges I've faced during when I used to work. So yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for giving your insights. I feel they're going to help people because a lot of people have confusions in their mind what to do. They look for the solutions and they don't get that guidance immediately. So probably this podcast will be able to help them a little, and they'll find their answers.
I hope so, Trupti. First of all, I have to thank you. Your questions were so engaging. You've engaged in the conversation so meaningfully. The feeling is very mutual. I feel like we've just started, and we've covered some important topics. And I have realized many things as I was speaking to you myself, which have been insights. So we'll definitely take back a lot from the conversation that we've had. But thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure to speak on this very important topic with you.
Thank you so much, Neha. Thank you. Thank you.